What's he like? Can you describe his demeanor?
I mean, he's an older gentleman who seems fairly confused and unaware of what's going on, which is exactly what I expected given the nature of what I saw during the arraignment, or excuse me, the initial appearance, and also the other descriptions and the other sort of ancillary evidence I've seen. But yeah, he seems like a person who is older, elderly, who has mental health issues and possibly diminished mental capacity. So he is exactly what anyone else would think. He didn't seem abrasive. He was pleasant enough. He was fine. I mean, he was just an older man.
Yeah, I mean, I know you can't speak to his medical conditions and what he's dealing with right now, but can you explain how serious of condition that he's in or how serious the medical issues are that he's facing? Are they life-threatening? Are they, you know, standard for someone of his age?
Well, so that question sort of, I suppose, begs the question, what is standard for someone of that age? I mean, he's an older man who was living in poverty. I mean, I think we can all agree that he was living in extremely impoverished conditions. I doubt he was seeing regular medical care previous to this. So yeah, he has some very serious health issues, so serious that the court was willing to his amend his bond to allow him to be given recognizance for medical purposes. As Attorney Archer stated, his care would likely have bankrupted the county. It's that level of seriousness. So yeah, without getting too far into the weeds, he has some very serious medical conditions that are going on. And I think for a person of his age, any serious medical condition is life-threatening. So I think he's now getting the care that he needs. But to suggest that he's out of the woods would be a bit too much.
Have you learned about any of the family? Like, did they go to the hospital? Did they go to doctor's offices, or had their health kind of been neglected when they were in this situation in this house?
So I can't really speak to a lot of any of the other people, to be honest with you. As a result of the gag order, there's obviously a bit, there's not quite as much that I can speak to as perhaps I was prior to the gag orders going in place. As you're probably well aware, the gag order kind of limits what I can discuss. When it comes to Mr. Siders, though, I can tell you that based on my understanding, he wasn't regularly going to get medical treatment. However, it has been reported elsewhere, and I believe it's been stated elsewhere that at very minimum, all these children were born in the hospital. So if that is in fact the case, and that is in fact true, and again, I don't have any inside knowledge or inside information, if that is true, then it would stand to reason at the very minimum, based on the ages of these children, that the mother was at least going to the hospital on a relatively regular basis to have these children. So I don't know what their care was otherwise, but that's my understanding.
Have you gotten any indication of Gary Sr.'s role in the family, how active and involved he was with the children, or did he have medical conditions that may have prevented him from being, an active member, an active, father figure in his family?
Sure. I wouldn't suggest that father figure is an appropriate way to phrase it. He was certainly grandfather. Again, I think that based on what I've seen, and frankly, what I've seen is mostly what's been in the public record because people have been posting things online. That's about the entirety of it. To be clear, I have not received any discovery yet, despite my filing, which is not unusual because we're still at the complaint stage. As I've mentioned from the very jump, we're not even at the indictment stage yet. So I haven't received any additional discovery than I did at the very outset, which was counsel only. But my understanding is that he was a grandfather living in the home with his wife, to the two parents, which are Siders Jr. and his wife, and the children. But he was grandfather. That's my understanding. What his specific involvement was, I would say this, based on what I've heard, I think it was fairly limited to just being a grandfather. Whatever that looks like, I don't have any specific information outside of whatever's been disclosed publicly.
Does this make it harder for you that there is such a gap between the charges in this case and the initial information that we got from law enforcement and now to where we still don't have an indictment? You haven't gotten any of the discovery, yet people are still, analyzing every bit of this case online on social media.
Yeah. To put a point on it, yeah. Which is exactly what I've been saying from the very beginning, that when the AG decided to open his mouth and run it about things he had no actual knowledge about, he created a firestorm with the media. And I don't blame the media, because when the media hears things like House of Horrors and evil and kept in conditions worse than farm animals and implications of cages and locked doors and chains and every bad thing you've seen on Netflix or on YouTube. He creates an environment that lends itself to this. I mean, I've seen people prognosticating online about sexual abuse and physical abuse and all the worst things that you can see. And every piece of evidence I've seen so far, whether it's colloquial, whether it's tangential, or whether it's actually directly from the state, has not been a single thing to show any of that sort of abuse. From what I've seen, and I've said this from the very beginning, and you'll recall in our earlier conversations, I said the same exact thing. This is a juvenile matter. It is likely an abuse, neglect, dependency matter. I'm not sure if you or your viewers know what that is, but abuse, neglect, dependency does not mean there's abuse. It does not mean there's neglect. It does not mean there's dependency. That sort of matter is similar to what one would say is, just because you call it a criminal matter doesn't mean that someone actually committed a crime. It's just the type of case it is. Abuse, neglect, dependency is the type of action that children's services would typically take, where they would ask to take temporary custody of kids or temporary care of kids, usually not under the abuse or neglect portions of the statute, but typically under the dependency portion, which basically just means, in short, the children are dependent on the state for some sort of action or some sort of conduct to be taken out of their situation. This often happens in cases where there's homelessness, or there's perhaps there's a lack of food, or perhaps the parents have been arrested and are no longer there, and they don't have a proper supervision, or maybe the parents don't have proper supervision or babysitting. All these things would qualify as dependent if the state believes that the children are in some need of additional care. This is not unusual in cases where you have intense poverty. And what I've said from the jump is that this is a case that appears to me to be criminalizing poverty. And everything I've seen so far appears to be that. And so now you have a situation where we're worried about playing defense. Now you have a couple of gag orders, which I understand why, but you also have people breaking into the home, posting videos and pictures on social media, obtaining things illegally, which, to be clear, breaking and entering and trespassing and committing obstruction of official business or obstruction of justice is a crime, is a significant crime, is potentially felonious in nature. So when you have all of this stuff happening, it obviously makes it difficult, because now I'm put in a tough spot where I'm either continuing to pound the drum and say, stop doing that, let the process play out, don't commit your own crimes, and trying to let the whole thing die out and let it be what it probably is, which is frankly just an abuse, neglect, dependency claim where these people needed help from the state and now they're getting it, and we should just go through the process in that manner. So yes, it's become very difficult as a result of all of that.
Do you see a world where this ends without criminal conviction for Gary Sr. at least?
Speaking just for Gary Sider Sr., my client, there are multiple paths which result in no criminal conviction. First and foremost, as you're probably already aware, we have the motion for competency that's been filed, motion for NGRI that's been filed for those evaluations to take place. If Mr. Sider Sr. is incompetent, he's not convicted. By the very nature of the law, an incompetent person cannot be convicted. They're not competent to stand trial. Even if he is competent, if he's found then to be not guilty by reason of insanity, which means as a result of whatever's going on with him, he is not able to understand the wrongfulness of his conduct or whatever, or the mens rea is not there, mens rea, the legal term for obviously having the mental state necessary, then again, he's not convicted. And finally, it is very important, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, when you asked about what his role was in the family, the fact of the matter is, this is a household which had two parents in the home. And if two parents are in the home, there's a question whether grandparents have any specific duty. And I'm not talking about a moral duty. People can make their own judgments about that, even for an extremely impoverished family, which is probably living in conditions that, thankfully, very few of your viewers or any other commentators have any knowledge about or any experience with. But even in a general household, if people's grandparents are living there, they may not necessarily have the same responsibilities or legal requirements that a parent does.